Hi, and welcome to this AzerothCore tutorial. I'm heyaapl, and I will be your tutorial master for today. Now, for this tutorial, we're actually going to be creating a droplet from scratch, installing all the prerequisite software and libraries we need to actually build AzerothCore, set up our database, build the core itself, and start the core. By the end of this tutorial, you'll have a working server that you can log in and play. Now, a few things to note. Some of this tutorial will be easier if you have additional software on your computer. Most of these applications are both available for the Mac and PC. In this tutorial, obviously I'm running on a PC. However, a lot of this I have also done on my Macintoshes. So the first thing is you're going to want a MySQL client. So for this tutorial, I'll be using Heidi SQL because it's free. Another one you can use is something called MySQL Workbench. That for sure works on the Mac as well as on PC. And then I also personally have paid for SQL Yog, which is my preferred SQL client. However, for this tutorial, to make this as accessible as possible, we are going to be using Heidi SQL. For SSH clients, DigitalOcean has a built-in console to let you access the server. So you can do all of this with no additional software for the server interface piece. However, to make your life easier and to not have to deal with weirdness in copying and pasting some of these commands, if you so choose, I will be using a SSH client. An available one for PC is Putty. If you search for Putty, you'll be able to find installation guides for that. On the Mac, you can actually just use Terminal. So the built-in Terminal application is perfectly fine. You can use that. In fact, I really like Terminal. But on today's tutorial, I will be using Terminus. It is a paid SSH client, and it also has a piece of software that we are going to also need. And I like the fact that it's baked into one tool. The other tool we're going to need is something called an FTP client. One of the ones that is great and I use all the time, and it's actually down here on my taskbar, is FileZilla. FileZilla is great. You can also use Terminus. Terminus has a built-in SFTP client, which is pretty awesome. So we will be leveraging that. Last but not least, I also highly recommend getting a text editor such as Notepad++. It is amazing for editing these files. It shows you per line. It does proper formatting. Notepad++ is great. It's free. I highly recommend getting that as well. So now that we have our prerequisites for non-server software, let's take a look at getting the droplet set up. So we're going to go up to the top right-hand corner, click on Create, and create a droplet. Now again, this server will be running Debian version 9. So we're going to create Debian 9.7 by 64. And you can choose the type of server you want to run. My actual server that I run for personal use is this particular model, or this particular version. So it's a standard server with 32 gigs of RAM and 8 CPUs. For today's tutorial, we will be using this $40 a month server. There are cheaper alternatives. You can use a $20 a month server and run your core on that, and it will be fine. 4 gigs of RAM is more than enough to run the server. You won't be able to have that many players on it, but it's more than enough for you and some friends. And it's 3 cents an hour. So it's a pretty good deal. For this tutorial, we're using this. So again, Debian 9, we're going to use standard, the $40 a month server. You can enable automated backups. For this particular droplet price, it is $8 a month. You can also back it up yourself. They also have something called snapshots, which are based on the number of gigs you're using. That may end up being cheaper. I like snapshotting a lot, but backups are also great. Backups are automatic and they are weekly. So backups are pretty nice. Next, we're going to pick our server location. For me, I'm going to be using the San Francisco 2. We're going to enable monitoring. Basically, this gives us additional and user-friendly graphs to see what's happening with our server. It does not cost anything. It is nice. If you decide you want to enable IPv6, you can do that. Again, it is free. For this, we're also going to be using a one-time password. If you are familiar with using SSH keys, we can use this. If not, for today's tutorial, we'll be using a one-time password, and this will actually get emailed to you once your node gets created. Next, let's create our name of the server, and I'm going to call mine AzerothCore. You can call yours whatever you want. My main one is called FrozenCore or FrozenCraft. Do whatever, name it whatever, it doesn't matter. We're going to hit create. And it's pretty fast. So this is all happening in real time. There's no cuts here. This little bad boy is just going to create. And while that's creating, I'm in another tab checking for an email from DigitalOcean. And essentially, they're going to be sending me a new root user password. So once this is on, it takes about a minute. It's not too long, but it does take a little bit of time. We will get this up and running. All right, so about a minute has passed, and I've gotten the email from DigitalOcean. So I'm just going to copy this password here. And we can take a look at this. And this is kind of what your backend looks like the first time you use it. You can see things like how much it's actually costing you per month, what is your CPU usage, your IO. This stuff will populate after a couple of hours of having the server open. And actually, by the time this tutorial is done, you'll see a whole bunch of spikes and stuff happening. Now, for the first time of using this, we're going to click on this console. And this is, for this tutorial, the only time we will be using the console through DigitalOcean. So now that we have this, our username is root, and the password is the password we had emailed to us. So you just paste it in. It looks like nothing happens, but it did. We're going to set our password, or excuse me, we're going to enter our current password. So just type it in again. And then we're going to come up with our new password. And I'm using a very secure password 1. So there you go. Super secret password right there. And we're in. Fantastic. Close out of the console. Now, if you are using the console, you won't do that. Stay in it. But for this tutorial, like I said, I will be using Terminus. So I'm going to open up Terminus. I'm going to add a new host. I do actually need to have copied the... I do actually need to have copied my IP address. Fantastic. I'm just going to connect. We are using SSH, default, root, my password, and we are going to save. And now I'm going to connect to AzerothCore. Here we go. We want to connect. Yep, absolutely. Bam. We are in. Cool. So now that we're in, we're going to do a couple of things right off the bat. One of the first things we're actually going to do is make sure that our time zones are set up correctly. Now, if you happen to live at the UTC 000, great. I, however, do not, and I want my server to be located on the west coast of the United States. So in order to do that first, if you'll notice, it says that it is 9 o'clock locally. However, this says that it's actually 4 in the morning on the 16th. So I'm just going to verify that by typing in time date CTL. And I just have this copied to my clipboard, paste, and we'll see, yep, in fact, it's set to the UTC code. So it's default quad zeros here. Now we're going to set the time zone. Now, in order to set the time zone, we actually need to first know what time zone it is we are looking for. This next command we're going to type in is very similar. So time date CTL, and then list dash time zones. Once you have this entered, hit return or enter, and you're going to see a bunch of time zones, literally every time zone under the sun. You can scroll up if you want. However, it's blocked once it's hit sort of the height limit here. And just hit enter to scroll down. So I'm looking for America, Los Angeles, which is going to be right here. Fabulous. And once you find the time zone you're looking for, if you're using Terminus, you can select, and on the PC, it's actually Control-Shift-C to copy. And then Control-Shift-V to paste. But we need to close out of this screen. So to close out of this, you hit Control-C, which quits, and you're back at your command line. So the next thing we're going to enter is we're going to be entering in our time zone. Now, here's basically how it works. So we have sudo time date CTL, set time zone, and then this your time zone here is what you're actually going to be typing in. So for me, I'm going to be typing in America, Los Angeles. So Los Angeles. There we go. And enter. And let's just verify that that worked. So we're going to make sure that the server now is showing up as 9:05 p.m. So I'm going to type time date CTL. And bam, there you go. 21:05 PDT. So we're now set to -7 of UTC. So step 1, we've configured our time zone. Pat yourself on the back. You have made it through the very first bit of our command line work tonight. Next up, we actually have to create a user for AzerothCore. Now, this might seem weird. Why can't we just use the default root user? There's quite a few reasons. Most of them end up being from a security standpoint. But the other is that by using this will actually make it a lot easier down the road because all of the file paths and everything that we're going to be doing in this tutorial are based on a specific Unix user. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create my user. And to do that, I'm just going to type add user. And the username I'm choosing is AzerothCore. So AzerothCore is my default user. Let me just make this actually a little bigger. There we go. Sorry about that. Let's go a couple more big. There we go. Perfect. Add user AzerothCore. Now this is the name of my user. You can call this Azeroth. You can call this whatever you want. Just remember it because it is something you're going to refer to and use a lot. This is also going to be the label of the folder path. So I wouldn't recommend going with anything too long because you will have to type this a lot. So add user AzerothCore and then hit enter. And basically it's going to have a password. I recommend choosing a password you can remember that is different than your root password. Once you have that set, you can type in a full name. Think of it like setting up a profile on Windows or on the Mac where you're setting the name of the user. I don't have anything for this because it's literally just a system service account. So I'm just going to hit return a whole bunch of times. Oops. I hope that worked. Well, we can test that. So we type sudo AzerothCore. Oops, sudo su AzerothCore. Bam. It did work. We're going to type exit. Normally, you would not speed through that. You would just type Y. So be a little careful spamming your enter button. But anyway, it still worked. We are good. But this user is not actually set up as a pseudo user, which means that they can't actually do anything. Well, they can, but not enough. We need to set this as an effective admin of our server. So to do this, the next command we're going to type is called usermod. And capitals are very important. So you need to make sure that you use the correct capitalization here. We're going to type dash, lowercase a, g, sudo, and then the name of the user you chose. So for me, it's going to be AzerothCore. And enter. And perfect. So it has now set this user AzerothCore as a pseudo user, which is important. And we can verify that this has worked. Now we're going to type sudo su AzerothCore, and this basically lets us log in as the AzerothCore user. And we'll notice that root will change from root to AzerothCore when I hit enter. And now we're signed in as AzerothCore. Now, what we want to do is we want to test and verify that we are, in fact, a pseudo user. So we want to verify that you did this correct. And in order to do that, you're going to type sudo who am I? And you're going to have to enter the password for this user. And once you've done that, it will say root. If it does not say root, then it did not work. And you need to go back to the root user and type the usermod -ag sudo and then the username again and test it again. Make sure that you are actually who am I as a root. Great. Now that we've got that done, let us exit and we're going to go back to the root user. So we've logged out of AzerothCore back to root. And here comes the fun part. There's a bunch of libraries we need to install in order to actually get this thing working. So I have this in a little thing because it's a lot to type. I'm just going to paste it. As you can see, this would have been a real ball ache to type out. So now that we have this here, we're just going to hit enter. And it's going to go for a minute. And the nice part is this is downloading from the DigitalOcean libraries or locations, and also directly from Debian. Hit yes to this, so Y, enter, and just kind of let it continue. If it asks us again, just hit Y and enter until eventually it says root, and that basically tells you that it is done. So we're just gonna keep on going, and it's just, you just kind of sit here, twiddle your thumbs, play some music, party hard. All right, it is almost done. We're approaching the last thing. This is the database it's installing, and then we will be good to go. Bam. All right, so now that we've got all of that installed, there's a few more base applications and system services we need to add. So before we do that, though, we are also going to do a sudo apt get update, which basically just says go and update the list of apps that can be installed. Perfect. So now it understands all the different apps that are out there that we can install, and we can do this in quick succession. So the first thing we're going to do is install an application called Screens. Now this is what lets us do other things besides just stare at a console once we actually get the server up and running, which is pretty important. So we're going to type sudo apt-get install screen, enter, and bam, done. Easy enough, quick and easy. The next is an application called curl or curl. This lets us go and download files from the interwebs, which is great because this is going to save you a ton of time in the future. You're welcome in advance. So we're going to type sudo apt install curl. Boom. We're good. We're going to do the configuration of MySQL. And funny enough, this is not actually MySQL we're using. It's MariaDB, but it's basically the same thing. So great. So we're going to type sudo MySQL secure installation. And this is going to let us configure the base MySQL user and remove a bunch of the test stuff that just comes with it. So once you've typed this, hit enter. And what we want to do here is we want to make sure that we do not enter a password. So just hit enter. And it's really important that you follow these instructions to a T, or you may inadvertently be breaking MariaDB. So just hit enter once. Set a root password is going to be no. So hit N, return. We're going to remove anonymous users. This is a yes, so hit yes. We're going to disallow root login remotely, so hit yes to this. We're going to remove the test databases and the access to it, so we're going to hit yes. And finally, we are going to reload the tables. This is basically a flush. So we're going to hit yes, and we are done. So our base configuration of MariaDB is now done, and it is securely configured. All right, two more. Actually, looking at my notes, it's one more. Hooray! We're going to do sudo apt install unzip. Awesome. This is going to let us unzip zipped folders. Cool. That will come in handy later. Next up, we are actually going to go back to the database. So the next part that we're going to do is be configuring our base user for MySQL. So to do this, we're going to just type MySQL. And from here, we are going to be typing in this command, which is basically grant all to all tables to a user called dbadmin at the %sign. So this %sign is important because this lets us connect remotely to the database. Now you can use whatever username you want. I'm using dbadmin. You can use whatever it is you want to name this. This basically says we can connect from anywhere, whether it is on the server itself or from our local machine. This is not the most secure way to configure your users. The most secure is to actually set up the specific users to allow them to log in from specific IP addresses. So what you should actually do is run this command for localhost and then run it from the IP addresses in which you will be accessing the database. I can't be bothered with this for my own servers. I feel like most people probably can't. If you're very worried about security and people trying to brute force into your MySQL database, set this up properly. Also, do not use password1 for your password. Use a secure password for the love of God. But for the purposes of this test, and by the time you see this, this server will be long destroyed and you won't actually be able to do anything with it. So once you've got this here, we're going to hit return and it's going to create this user, which is cool. But we actually have to flush privileges because we can't actually do anything from this. So we're going to type flush privileges and a semicolon, and boom. It refreshed the permissions, and now dbadmin is an actual user, admin user to the full database with that command. Great. And we're just going to type exit, and we've left MariaDB. We're back at the root user. Next up, we're going to configure this so that way it will actually let us connect remotely to the database. Because today, in the base installation of MariaDB, you cannot connect remotely to the database. We actually have to update one of the MariaDB configuration files, which is coming up next. So up next, we are going to go to that specific configuration file. So I'm going to type cd/etc/mysql and all this junk and hit go. And it should, if you typed it in correctly or copied and pasted correctly, it will take you to the folder in which the file we need is at. Now we're going to use the nano file editor. It's just here for us. We don't have to do anything. We're just going to type nano and then the name of the file we're changing, which is actually called 50 server.cnf. It's just CNF. There's no O, CNF, and then return. And now you will be in the nano file editor. Now we need to go down to this bind address location, and we actually need to change this so that way it reads 0.0.0.0. 4 zeros like this. And by changing the bind address to this effectively lets us connect from any IP address, which is very important. So we want to be able to actually touch the database and interact with it from a GUI client for MySQL, such as Heidi SQL. And in order to do that, we need to get this set up. So we're going to hit Control X once you've done that. So Control X will exit. And we want to save the modified buffer. So hit Y. And then Control T for the files. And we want to save this. Navigate over to this file here, 50-server.cnf. So once you've made sure that you're at the 50-server.cnf file, you are going to hit return or enter. And bam, it has saved. Next, we actually have to restart our MySQL server so that way it properly refreshes these new permissions and these new settings. So we're going to type sudo /etc init.d MySQL, and then we're going to type a restart, which is just the command we're running. And it's going to restart the MySQL service. And once this is done, you're going to go back to the root. So cool. We're going to hit cd, which brings us back to our default location, just so we have a cleaner command line. Next, we're going to be configuring our firewall. Now, if you are very familiar with firewalls, this should be a breeze. We're using UFW. If you're unfamiliar with firewalls, effectively what we're doing is blocking all inbound traffic to the server except for specific ports, which will be opening back up. All outbound traffic will be unrestricted, so all outbound is just fine. Now, the ports we will be unblocking are the very few ports, there's only 3 of them, that we need to be running the server, and we're also unblocking the SSH port because otherwise we will lose access to our server and lock ourselves out, which would be bad. So again, we're going to type sudo apt update, make sure that nothing has changed in the last 5 seconds, which good news is it has not. We're going to type sudo apt install UFW. Now UFW again is the firewall we're using. And once we've got that done, we're going to type, the first thing we're going to do is block all of the incoming traffic. And then we'll eventually open this up. So we're going to type sudo ufw default deny incoming. So now our incoming policy is defaulted to deny for all ports. And we're going to do the same, except the opposite, for outgoing. So we're going to say sudo ufw default allow outgoing and enter. Beautiful. Now let's open up our SSH port, which is port 22. And we're going to type sudo ufw allow SSH. And beautiful. We're going to repeat that 3 more times with different ports. So up next is port 3306. So we're going to type sudo ufw allow 3306. This is the port that MySQL uses for the database. So in order to connect to it remotely, we need to unblock it. Bam. Next up is the authentication server port, which is 3724. So again, we're going to type sudo ufw allow 3724 and enter. And last but not least is our world server port. And that is port 8085. So we're going to type sudo ufw allow 8085. And now all of our ports are enabled. We are going to turn UFW on. Double, triple check that you have added 4 ports here. SSH, 3306, 3724, and 8085. If you have not done this, please, please, please be sure to do this. Your console should look something very similar to this. Otherwise, you run the risk of locking yourself out and you have to restart. So, or at least you have to disable UFW and then try again. So we're going to type sudo UFW enable. And this may interrupt existing connections. We're going to say, yep, that's cool. And fantastic. So our firewall is now active and it will be enabled automatically when the system turns on, which is very handy. All right. So now we are approaching a point of where we can start to do some fun stuff with AzerothCore. So we have to first clone the master branch. So we're going to sudo into our AzerothCore user. So let's do sudo su AzerothCore. We're going to type cd to go to our base directory, which is basically our home directory. And we're going to type this command here, which is git clone, and then the address of the branch we want. So it's github.com/AzerothCore, blah, 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 branch master, single branch, AzerothCore. Copy and paste this. I would not recommend typing this unless you are really good at reading small text. Once you've got this, hit return. And it's just going to clone for like a hot minute. Perfect. Now that that's done, we are going to go to the new folder that was just created. And that folder is called AzerothCore. So we're typing cd and then AzerothCore. And now that we're here, we actually have to make a new folder. And that command is mkdr. And this folder has to be called build. Make sure it's called build. Otherwise, we are going to be breaking stuff when we plan on actually building our core. So make directory build. We're going to hit enter. It looks like nothing happened, except it actually did. We're going to navigate to that new build folder. So cd build. And now we are in the build folder. So next up, we're actually going to do something called cmake, which is a bit of a pre-assembly process. This is what tells our compiler to go and compile all of these different thingies. So we're going to copy in the cmake command. Don't touch any of this unless you know exactly what you're doing. Otherwise, just kind of let this be and hit enter. And just sit back, relax. And if we did everything else right in the earlier steps, this will not throw a bunch of errors. Now that we've done this, we actually have to start compiling the core. So to do this, we're going to type make-j and the number of cores of your server. So if you bought the 2-core server, you're going to type 2. If you did 4, like we did, we're going to type 4, or 8, or however many you've purchased on DigitalOcean. Once you've done this, hit enter, and it's just going to compile. Now, on a 4-core system, this seems to take about 15 minutes. Step away, grab a drink, and we will be back after a bit of a time lapse. All right, we are almost done, 100%, and almost there. Lots of hundreds, lots of hundos. There we go. Perfect. So now that we have done the make-j4, next up, we're going to do another command, which basically assembles this. So this is all compiled. It's kind of sitting in this amorphous, not really working state. We're just going to type make install, and this will also place everything in the correct location. So this is going to create our azeroth-server folder, which is going to store the binary of the core and the auth server. So we're going to hit this. Perfect. That is kind of that from a building of the core standpoint. So congratulations, pat on the back. You've done some good work so far, but we are not quite done yet. So we still have at least, looking at my instructions, we have 6 more steps to do, 6 more like milestones to do. Next up, we're going to set up the data files. So what we want to do now is we want to type cd. We're going to get out of our build folder, and we are going to type cd azeroth-server. Now, in the Azeroth server, we are going to type the following: curl https://wow.heyaapl.com/data.zip --output data.zip. So what we're doing here is we're basically going to download all of the DBC files and the vmaps and the mmmaps movement maps and a whole bunch of other stuff that we need to get the server actually running. You can extract this yourself using the AzerothCore's tools. And if for whatever reason this link goes down in the future, this is available to download off of the AzerothCore installation guide. You just have to upload it yourself using an FTP client. But this will be really fast, and it's pretty large. So we're just going to hit enter, and we'll see it's going to download like a gig in a couple seconds. Six seconds, we downloaded almost 1.2 gigs. I'd say that's pretty fast. Next up, we actually have to unzip this because we downloaded a zipped folder. So to do that, we're going to type unzip, and then we're going to type data.zip. Creative name, huh? I know. I thought of it myself. Oh, bad jokes are still bad jokes. Okay, now that we've got that, we actually have to go to this new folder called data. So we're going to go to our data folder, which is inside of the Azeroth server folder. And we're going to unzip all of the zips. And there's 4 zips here. There's vmaps, mmaps, regular maps, and DBCs. So we're going to type unzip, a single quote mark, an asterisk or a star, .zip, and the final end quote. And hit go. And it's just going to be a lot of flying text, but you can kind of see that there's some progress. So we're still in the vmaps. And after this, we're in regular maps. And then I'm going to guess DBC and mmaps. At mmaps, there's a bunch. And then once this is done, we are done. Which is cool. At least with the data files. There's still quite a bit of work to do and a lot of configuration that we have to do. So, bam. Everything's there, which is pretty cool. So, next up on our to-do list is to actually go and configure our configuration files for the server. So this is going to be for the auth server and the world server. We're going to be using the SFTP client. However, if you feel very adventurous and like an expert, you can use Nano. But for this, we're going to be going outside of sort of a regular look and feel, and we're going to be going to the SFTP. So this is the point where you're going to fire up FileZilla, or in my case, I'm going to go to the SFTP server. So what you want to do is you want to navigate to the AzerothCore. If you're using Terminus, AzerothCore, you're going to sign in. And we want to go to the base directory. So we see all of these folders here. And the folder we care most about right now is the home folder. So we're going to go to home. We're going to go to AzerothCore. So here's our user folder I was talking about. Here's the AzerothCore folder we were in. And here's azeroth-server. So this is what we just made. This is what actually has our server stuff on it. We're going to double click this bad boy. And our data folder is right here. We can delete this if we want. We do not have to. We can just leave it there. We have a bunch of space on the server. But if you want to be efficient and want to get rid of it, go ahead and delete it like I just did. Now, the configuration files are stored in etc. So go to etc. And we need the auth server and the world server.conf.dist. Now, it is very important you do not delete or change the .dist files. These are your restores. This is how you undo any major fuck-ups you have. So keep these as you would right here. We're going to right-click this. In Terminus, we just copy to the target directory. In FileZilla, you will download these. We want to download these. In my case, I'm moving them to the desktop just so that way they are easy to access. We're going to move this aside, hide this, hide our World of Warcraft folder as well, and perfect. Now this is where having a Notepad++ comes in handy. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to remove this .dist name from the file extension, and we do want to change that. They're no longer .dists. They're just going to be .confs, which means that the server can actually use them. So perfect. Now that we've renamed both, we've removed the .dist from both, and it's just .conf. Open both into Notepad++. So we're in the world server first. We need to go down, and we're going to make a couple of things. So the first is this data directory. So what we need to do is we need to type /home/AzerothCore, which is the name of our user, /azeroth-server/data. So this is where we've stored that data folder we just extracted. This is really important, so that way it actually works. I know, simple, but we want to make sure that you get this data directory. This is at line 64 here in the world server config. Next up, we actually are going to change our login database, our world database, and our character database info. So our username for this is going to be dbadmin, which is our database user. And the password I created earlier, believe it or not, was password1. So safe, secure password. No one will ever guess it. Please, again, do not use password1. Do not use dbadmin as your username. Come up with something secure. We're just going to paste this through. So we show dbadmin, password1, and the name of the table we're going to store this in, or the database we're going to store this in. Do not change the IP address. Do not change the port unless you know what you were doing. If you don't understand what any of this means, even more reason to not touch it. If you need to double check, or if you somehow fuck it up, you can copy and paste from above and paste it here. Although, be careful, make sure that you keep it as core_auth, because this is what our server is actually going to default to when we import the database. So world server's done. We can close out of this, save it, close out. Next up, we got to scroll towards the bottom of this, and we're going to go to our MySQL settings here. And here we go. Right here, this login database info. We're again going to replace the 2 AA cores, which is the username and then password, with our dbadmin and password1 username and password. So we've got that. We can close out a Notepad++, and we're going to upload these back to the server. Now, again, make sure that it is not .dist. So we should have a .conf and a .dist. There should not be 2 .dists. Do not overwrite the .dists. Otherwise, GG, you have to restart. So with that said, you don't actually have to restart, but just don't do it. Once we've got that uploaded, that is the server configuration done. Next, we actually have to go and set up the database for the server before we ever turn this bad boy on. So we're going to go to AzerothCore. We're just going to click here. I'm going to click on the file path, but essentially you're going to the home folder again. You're going to go to AzerothCore, and we need to go to AzerothCore, the folder called AzerothCore. We're going to go to config or conf, and funny enough, we have another .dist. And what are we doing with .dists? Well, we are just downloading them and then renaming them. So do not keep the .dist, rename the .dist, and do not overwrite the .dist. So just change the name. The file extension, yeah, got it. Cool, thanks. Now, one of the things that may happen is that if you're on PC and you double click it, it will not open in an editor. It will try to just run the shell script. Right click instead and just edit with Notepad++. Anyway, so now that you've got this open, we need to go down to the DB importer, exporter / importer tool, which is kind of down a little bit around here. Here we go. Okay, so around line 130-ish. So here we go. So our username here, so we have to replace all these references to acore with our username we set up earlier. So we're going to call it dbadmin, and our password is password1. Cool. dbadmin, password1. Cool. So once you've updated the authorization, the character, and the world server information, again, we're just going to hit save, close out of Notepad++, and we're going to upload this new config.sh back to the conf folder. Once we've done that, we're going to go back to the terminal, and we're going to go back to our console here. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to run the install script here. So in order to do this, we are actually going to go to the cd/home/azerothcore/azerothcore folder to start. So this needs a little bit of context in order to actually run. So once you're here, we're going to type bash apps dbassembler dbassembler.sh, and we're going to hit enter. Now we are going to be using option 5, which is import all. So we're going to type import -all, and we're going to hit enter. And I don't know why this is erroring. It has been erroring lately. Normally it is just fine. Just keep pasting and hitting 5 and going. It will eventually just work after several errors. So see, so it's done the auth, it's done characters, and next up, it will work for the world. So it's going to take a while. And it'll just work. So after a couple of tries, I promise it will work. It seems scary. It seems like it's going to fail. I don't know why you have to do this multiple times. It seems to just be a bug. But anyway, beautiful. We're going to hit quit. We are done. It has worked. Everything is done. All right. So the next thing we have to do is actually get this so that way we can connect. Now we need our server IP again. So I'm going to go back and copy this. And I'm going to be connecting to the database. So in Heidi SQL, I'm going to paste the server IP. My username is dbadmin, and my password is password1. Now, if we did everything correct, we should be able to connect. But it's a bit of a crapshoot. So we're going to hit open. We're going to save. And hey, it worked. We are actually in. Goddamn, it worked. So we're going to go to the acore auth table. And we're going to go down to the realm list table. So in Heidi SQL, you're going to switch to the data tab up near the top. And here we have the address for AzerothCore. And we're going to paste the server IP under address. And we can rename the server here. So if we want to call it something else, you can do that here. I am not. Once you've done that and it has saved, if you're unsure, you can just hit execute or the check mark to post the changes. Once you've done that, you are basically good here. You can just minimize this. You can keep this open, you can close it. I'm going to minimize it just in case something goes wrong. I'm also going to be minimizing DigitalOcean here because we don't need it. And we are now approaching a point where we can start the server. Can you believe it? So what we want to do next is we are going to type cd/home/azeroth-server/bin. So now we're basically in the starting point. What we're going to do next is we're going to use the screen tool. So we're going to type screen AMDS. Capitals here are very important. So capital A, lowercase m, lowercase d, capital S. You can look up what these parameters mean, but essentially what it's doing is it's starting it up in a screen that is hidden behind the scenes and is not session specific. So you want to use AMDS. There are other things you can use here, but for this, I highly recommend using AMDS. We're going to give it a rememberable name. I'm going to call it auth, and then we're actually going to start the auth server. So by typing ./auth-server, and it looks like nothing happened, but we can see if anything actually happened. So we can type screen resume-r auth. And hey, okay, fantastic. So we didn't screw everything up. It has actually found the core of the server. It has found the realm and the IP address, which is fantastic. Once you're in this, you're going to hit Control A and D, and that bumps you out and you've detached from the auth screen. Next up, we're going to set up the world server. So we're going to do screen, again, AMDS. We're going to call it world and world server, like that, /world server, enter. And again, nothing is happening. So if we want to look and see what's happening, we can do screen -r world, and we can see it turn it on. And again, amazingly, it worked. Woohoo! Okay. But we can't actually do anything yet. And the reason for that is because literally no account exists. So next up, let us create the account and set it to the max game master level as well. So to do that, if you're unsure and you want to see all the commands available to you, you just type help and you'll see all the base commands. So things like save all, restart, or server, and then there's restart in there, stuff like that. We're going to type account, create, and I'm just going to call this admin. And the password, believe it or not, is going to be password 1. Bam. So now we have an admin account, which is our first account in the database, which is kind of cool. Next up, let's set this to a game master. So we're going to type account, set GM level, account, set GM level. Occasionally the console will just ping with an update time. Just hit enter, type again. GM level, admin, level 3, which is the max level admin. And you're going to add a -1, which basically says all realms on the server. So we're going to do that. So now admin is a true admin account on AzerothCore. So with this said, let us just push this off to the side. And we're going to open up our World of Warcraft folder. We're going to go to data, ENUS. We're going to edit our Notepad++. We're going to update this to the IP address of our server. We're going to close out of that. And let's open up WoW. Let's see what happens. Let's fire this bad boy up. All right, so we're called admin and password 1. Bam! We are officially connected to AzerothCore. Look at that. Now the configs are going to default you to, as a game master, to level 80 to start. You can adjust all of that in the worldserver.conf folder, file. Here we go. I've got all my add-ons set up, but thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure to head over to the Discord for AzerothCore if you have any questions or run into any issues. Again, my name was heyaapl. Thank you very much for watching. Peace out, stay classy, I love your guys' faces, and I will see you all in the next tutorial. Bye!